All right, what's going on, guys? So in this video, I plan on discussing how it is that I've progressed across the last 4 weeks since I've been following a bro split, and how it is I would recommend setting up your bro split so that it not only makes sense within the microcycle or within the 5-day split itself, but also across the span of, say, 4 to 6 weeks. Generally, what we're looking for is to have mesocycles that themselves have some sort of progression scheme across, line up in such a way that, you know, what you're doing at the beginning of the year is less than what you're doing, you know, at the end of the year. Or whatever time frame you have for yourself. That doesn't mean that in each and every block of training, the total amount of work or the total amount of volume always has to increase. It doesn't have to be linear like that. We can have blocks of training where the volume goes down and say the intensity goes up, or perhaps blocks of training where there's more of a focus on active recovery and intensity and volume are both low. The main thing that you're after when it comes to long-term planning for programming is to be at least capable of doing more over here than you were over here. And so how you actually get from here to here is going to be dictated by what it is that you do in those individual training blocks. So what I'm going to be doing in this video is zooming in on one of those blocks where I am running a bro split and covering how it is that across the course of that bro split I've ensured that I've made progress. Now, I find that what a lot of people do is they tend to get overwhelmed, and I find they sort of get paralysis by analysis when it comes to long-term planning. And when I talk about long-term planning, I don't mean that you know exactly what you're doing on this day 1 year from now. Essentially, all it means is that you've set some goals, you're regularly reviewing those goals as you go along, and you're setting up plans on the short term to ensure that you get to that long-term goal. I just want to outline quickly 2 points that I think are sometimes overlooked when it comes to progression, and those are eating adequate amount of calories and working hard. If you just have a fancy progression scheme and you're just going for a target number of reps or a target percentage of your 1 rep max, and you're just consistently having lackadaisical type workouts, then that's going to hinder your progression. So the first option that's available to you when running a bro split is to take what I would call a fully intuitive approach to progression. And this is what I'm currently doing myself, and I found it to be extremely rewarding in terms of both progress and actually really enjoying my training. And essentially how this works is you just have to give yourself feedback from the previous week and not change things too much from week to week. The importance of tracking when doing an intuitive approach to progression is something that I just can't emphasize enough. Without actually tracking the numbers, there's really no way to be sure that you're adding volume over time. All that you do is you basically look at what you did last week and you either add a rep or you add some weight or you add a set, and which of those 3 you choose to increase can depend on what it is you're feeling that day. I look at my training journal from the previous week, I'll look at the exercises I used, and I will keep most of them the same. I might switch one exercise out and alternate between exercises week to week, in which case I'll just look at what I did 2 weeks ago when I did that exercise before and ensure that I either add a set or a rep or some weight. And there doesn't have to be any fancy periodization scheme. You don't have to undulate the reps weekly or anything like that. As long as you're able to add something to your sets across the course of the mesocycle, then what you've done is going to yield some progress for you. I think it's worth noting that the easiest way to add volume across the weeks would be to add sets, since you're able to just add so many more reps than just adding, say, 1 rep to each set, or adding, you know, 5 pounds to the machine or to the bar or whatever. So adding sets across a mesocycle can be a very useful tool in terms of drastically increasing your volume. So to ensure that I don't get too willy-nilly with my progression across the course of the mesocycle, I do set 2 constraints on myself. The first being a rep range constraint. So for any given exercise, I will either work in the 5 to 10, 10 to 15, or 15 to 20 rep range. And I try to ensure that about half of my training volume is coming from within the 10 to 15 rep range for this particular training cycle. And then I also set some sort of RPE constraint on myself. I'm not too strict with this, but I do generally try to leave about 1 rep in the tank. So I set myself, generally speaking, about an RPE of 9. And then I'll typically take the last set of each exercise to failure. I won't always do that on the compound lifts like the squat, the bench press, and the deadlift. But I always leave notes for myself to give myself an idea of how a set felt the previous week. I have my own little notation system where an upwards arrow indicates that the weight was too light and I need to increase the weight next time. A sideways arrow will indicate that the weight was perfect that week, so I should probably keep that the same for the first set the next week. And a downwards arrow indicates that the weight was a little bit too heavy. My form probably got a little bit loose on the exercise, and so it might not be a bad idea to drop the weight back a little bit the next week. And in essence, the arrows don't really differ too much from the RPE scale. It's really just a way of letting yourself know how difficult a given set felt. But I do find that the arrows sort of just directly let me know, okay, I need to decrease the weight next week. You're given an exact direction with which you should take your sets the following week. And then in addition, I will include some other autoregulatory techniques, such as the DAPRE system, where you do 1 set that we'll call the test set. After your warm-ups, you'll take that to essentially concentric failure, and then based on how many reps you get with that set, that's going to determine what it is that you do for your subsequent sets. So let's say that you have a target of 6 to 8 reps for your working sets, and you go in and you do your test set with a weight that you think you can probably do somewhere around 6 to 8 reps to failure, and you get 10 reps with it, then you underestimated your strength. You were stronger than you thought you were going into the test set. So you would want to bump the weight up, say, by 10%. And then conversely, if you took your approximate 6 to 8 rep max for that day to failure, but you only got 4 or 5 reps, then for the working sets, you would decrease the load by 5 to 10% and then carry out your working sets to failure with that adjusted load. So this is a way of prescribing the loads that you use on any given training day based on how it is you're feeling that day. I find that part of the appeal to the bro split is just being able to be flexible and being able to do what it is you feel like you're capable of doing on that given day. Now, there are, of course, other ways that you can progress across a bro split. I would direct you guys to a fantastic video. I'll put a link here. Done by Eric Helms of 3DMJ, and he covers in quite a bit of detail probably what are the best progression schemes that are available, and I will just quickly touch on them here. And so the first one is essentially a percentage-based approach. Figure out what your 1 rep max is for a lift, and then you prescribe your loads based on a percentage of that 1 rep max. Throughout the course of, say, 4 to 8 weeks, you can undulate the load weekly or whatever, but the main idea is that at the end, you're doing more than you were at the beginning, and when you're here, you can test your maxes again, plug in the new numbers, and now you've got more weight on the bar, automatically you're handling more volume. So another approach that we have in terms of a more structured progression scheme would be a simple linear progression. So an example of this would be, say you're working in the 6 to 8 rep range and you have 3 sets to do on a given exercise. In week 1, you would do, say, 100 pounds for 3 sets of 8. Week 2, you would do 105 pounds, so you'd add a little bit of weight, but do 3 sets of 7. In week 3, you would do 110 pounds, so add another little bit more weight for 3 sets of 6. And so you can see that across the 3 weeks, the volume has decreased, but the load that you're handling has gone up. And so when the volume decreases and the intensity increases, we just call that linear progression. And then in the 4th week, you might want to do a little deload or something, and then you would repeat the cycle. So when you come back to the beginning, now in week 5, you would be doing 105 pounds for 3 sets of 8. So a little bit more weight, and then there's your increase in volume. And then you would just repeat that cycle as long as you're progressing. And then a third approach that I like to use is sort of a reverse linear approach. So this works well in sort of the higher rep ranges where it's difficult to add load each and every workout. So let's say the 12 to 15 rep range, week 1, say you have 3 sets of 12. Week 2, you're going to add a rep somewhere. So say you do 3 sets of 13. Week 3, you do 3 sets of, or say you do 2 sets of 13, 1 set of 14, and you just keep going until you get to 3 sets of 15. So you don't add any weight to the movement until you max out the top end of that rep range. Once you max out the top end of the rep range, you go back to the beginning where you're doing 3 sets of 12, except now you've got more weight on the bar, so you increase the load. So I think that an intuitive approach to progression is most appropriate when your intrinsic motivation is high, and also when you have a desire for a little bit more increased flexibility. And then on the other hand, I think that the structured approach, while it can be fitted into an intuitive approach and they can be blended together, I think that a structured approach is good for someone who wants more structure, may not be quite as motivated in the gym, and wants to ensure that they are in fact progressing. So guys, I hope that you learned something throughout the course of this video, and as always guys, thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.
Come in your life. Come in your life and co-op.